Normally, the woods out here echo. If you snap a dry branch at 2 in the morning, the sound carries for miles. But sometimes, it just swallows the sound. The echoes die. And when you live in a place that's supposed to echo, you learn very quickly to pay attention to the silence. But tonight, the nightmare didn't start in the woods. It started in the corner of my workshop. I was out there alone, about 50 yards from the main cabin. Lauren and Emma were fast asleep inside the house, completely insulated behind reinforced locks. As long as they were asleep, I could work. When you've spent 10 years dealing with the things that hide in the Appalachian ridges, sleep doesn't come easy. It means I spend a lot of late nights out here, surrounded by old analog recording equipment, shortwave radios, and piles of manila folders that smell like cheap coffee and mildew. It was past midnight. It wasn't a violent storm, just a heavy, steady, freezing downpour drumming against the corrugated tin roof of the workshop. The power out here is unstable on a good day, and the storm was making the overhead lights flicker, but the sound of the rain was actually nice. It created a solid wall of white noise that drowned out the usual creaks and groans of the timber settling in the cold. I had a space heater running under my stool, a mug of black coffee cooling next to the drill press, and a pair of heavy headphones slung around my neck. I was trying to repair a damaged cassette tape I bought off a retired fire warden a few weeks ago. The tape was badly warped, and the magnetic ribbon was brittle. I was using a tiny pair of tweezers and a magnifying glass to carefully re-spool it by hand. It requires absolute concentration. You slip, you snap the ribbon, and the audio is gone forever. I had just managed to thread the ribbon back into the plastic casing when the shortwave radio on the top shelf suddenly cracked open. It didn't just turn on, it erupted. A massive, jarring burst of digital static tore through the quiet workshop, so loud it physically rattled the pegboard behind my workbench. The volume knob was cranked to the absolute maximum. My hand jerked, the tweezers snapped together, and the brittle brown ribbon of the cassette tape severed completely. I swore under my breath, dropped the broken tape, and reached for the shortwave. I keep it tuned to the local emergency frequencies, but this wasn't a weather alert. It was a raw, unshielded squelch, like two massive live wires grinding together. I grabbed the volume dial and violently twisted it to the left, trying to kill the noise before it woke Lauren up in the main house. I turned the dial. The volume didn't drop. It didn't even fluctuate. The static continued to scream, filling the small room with a punishing wave of sound. I gritted my teeth, reached over the top of the metal casing, and flipped the heavy toggle switch to the off position. The static didn't stop. I stared at the radio. The display was dead. The power switch was flipped to off, but the static was still pouring out of it. My pulse jumped. I grabbed the power cord running from the back of the radio and yanked it out of the wall. The plug dropped onto the concrete floor with a dull thud. The noise didn't stop. I stood there, my pulse thudding in my ears. I reached around to the back, popped the latch, and slid the battery out. I set it on the workbench. It was still screaming. The noise was so loud my teeth ached. I took a step back, my eyes darting toward the door. Something was out there. Something was doing this. I reached out, my hand hovering over the loaded .357 resting on the workbench. Before I could touch it, the static cut out. The sudden silence was deafening. My ears were ringing. The only sound left was the steady drumming of the rain on the tin roof. I didn't move. I kept my hand resting near the gun, my eyes locked on the radio sitting on the bench. Then, the speaker crackled again. Not static this time. It was a microphone keying up.
Control, this is Sector 4 Containment. We have a breach on the northern ridge of Lantern Bend. The perimeter is compromised. Confirming visual tracking now.
I froze. Sector 4? Containment? It wasn't the regular county dispatch.
It's pulling the ambient sound out of the environment. The dead zone is expanding over grid coordinate. Stand by.
The man sighed.
Grid coordinate 34 Alpha. God damn it. Control, there's a structure inside the anomaly radius. We have a civilian inside the zone.
I leaned over the workbench, staring at the empty battery compartment of the radio. I didn't have a microphone plugged into this rig. I couldn't transmit.
Control, be advised. The target is an energy sink. It's actively absorbing acoustics and thermals to keep its form. I'm pulling the property records now.
An anchor. I remembered the Protocol Black incident. A dispatcher using someone to ground an energy sink. A cold knot of genuine fear formed in my stomach. Lauren and Emma were asleep in the main house. If this thing was pulling energy to sustain itself, the microphone keyed again.
All right, listen up. I know you're down there. I know you're in the workshop on the property. Don't attempt to transmit back. Just listen.
I stopped breathing.
I'm Officer Miller. I'm with the Department of Natural Resources. Evan, listen to me. The entity moving toward your property is an energy void. It absorbs sound and heat to grow. If you want to survive the night, you're going to do exactly what I tell you. If you fail to comply, the anomaly will collapse and consume you, and it will hit the main house. Do you understand?
I stared at the radio.
First rule. You fight it by overwhelming it. You can't allow the sound levels in your immediate vicinity to drop. If it gets quiet, the anomaly will overtake your position. The rain on the roof is keeping you hidden. But be advised. The entity is pushing the storm cell out. The rain is about to stop. You must create sustained noise. Do it now.
I didn't wait to see if he was lying. I moved. I turned away from the workbench and looked up at the tin roof. The rain was starting to thin out. It didn't taper off naturally. The heavy downpour turned into a light scatter. Then a slow drip. Then absolute, suffocating silence. The rain didn't stop falling. I could see the water streaking down the dirty glass of the single window on the wall. But the sound of the impacts had been completely erased. The pressure in the workshop suddenly rose, like I had just driven to the bottom of a deep valley.
The rain's gone. It's too quiet. You need to elevate the noise level immediately, or it'll collapse the space around you.
I lunged toward the corner of the workshop where I kept my power tools. I grabbed my air compressor, my thumb frantically jamming the power switch to the on position. Nothing happened. The motor didn't engage. I hit the switch again. Still dead. I traced the power cord back to the wall outlet. It was plugged in. The breaker hadn't tripped, but the machine was dead.
The grid's down. It's draining power in a massive radius. Your wall outlets are dead. Your battery backups will be drained. You need something without power, something sustained. Do it now. It's at the perimeter of the structure.
The shortwave radio wasn't drawing power from the wall or a battery. It was functioning purely on whatever anomalous frequency Miller was broadcasting on. It was a closed loop that I couldn't replicate. I needed something physical, something loud. I abandoned the air compressor and spun back to the workbench. My eyes frantically scanned the pegboard. Wrenches, hammers, screwdrivers. None of them could produce a sustained sound on their own. Then, I saw it. Bolted to the far end of the workbench was a vise. I rushed to the end of the bench, grabbed a rusted hacksaw, and clamped a thick piece of rebar into the jaws of the vise. I slammed the blade of the saw against the steel and started sawing like my life depended on it. The sound returned instantly. It was a harsh, violent, metallic screech. The grinding of hardened steel tearing into iron. It cut through the silence like a knife.
Audio spike registered. The noise is keeping you hidden.
I let out a shaky breath, still sawing furiously.
Keep it up. It's on the property. It's moving between the house and your workshop.
I kept my eyes locked on the vise, the screeching of the metal ringing in my ears. I felt the temperature in the room plummet. The walls of the workshop began to groan. It was a deep, structural strain. The studs inside the drywall popped and cracked, an agonizing sound of wood bending under immense pressure. The entity wasn't just walking past the building, it was pressing itself against the exterior.
Control, the mass is hugging the northern wall of the workshop. It's testing the barrier. Evan, don't let up. It's waiting for a break in the sound.
The workbench vibrated violently. The pressure outside the building was so intense that the single pane of glass on the north window bowed inward, the cold glass warping visibly in the frame. I expected it to shatter, but it didn't break. It just strained, pushed to the absolute limit. I stared at the warped glass. I gritted my teeth and kept sawing. The radio crackled again. He sounded frantic.
Evan, it's not leaving. It's waiting you out. It knows you're in there, it's just waiting for the noise to stop.
I kept my eyes locked on the vise, my arm burning.
We can't let it reach the town. There's too many people. We have to ground it tonight. We have to trap it.
I stopped sawing. The unnatural silence rushed back into the room instantly.
You have to vent the pressure. Go to the door and crack it open. The entity will try to force its way through the gap. It will get stuck.
I stared at the door. If I cracked it even an inch, the entity would rip it off its hinges. It wouldn't get stuck. It would pour into the room like water from a burst dam. He wasn't trying to save me. He was trying to trap it inside the workshop, using me as the bait.
Evan, I will drop the magnetic shield on the main house right now. It will find your family. Open the door.
They were using my family as leverage. I dropped the saw. I didn't reach for the door. I reached for the .357 on the workbench. It was loaded with heavy hollow point rounds.
You're making a mistake. You can't shoot it.
I cocked the hammer. The heavy metallic click echoed violently in the silent workshop. I aimed the barrel directly at the warped glass of the north window and pulled the trigger. The shot in the confined space was deafening. The blast of the magnum shattered the window, blowing the glass out into the storm. The entity wasn't just outside anymore. The gunshot had drawn it right to me. I was now the loudest thing in the valley. They couldn't redirect it to the house even if they tried. The temperature in the workshop plummeted below freezing. Every breath felt like inhaling crushed glass. I spun around. A massive shifting wall of gray static was pressing itself through the broken frame. It was pulling itself into the room. I fired again, right into the center of it. The blast illuminated the workshop in orange fire. The bullet tore straight through the static and hit the trees outside. The mass didn't even flinch. The entity surged forward, dropping onto the concrete floor. A thick layer of frost spiderwebbed outward toward my boots. I threw the revolver onto the workbench and bolted for the far wall. I needed a bigger noise. I grabbed my gas-powered chainsaw. I slammed it onto the floor, planted my boot, and ripped the starter cord. Nothing. The gray mass was halfway across the room. The frost was creeping up my legs. I could feel the oxygen being pulled straight out of my lungs. I yanked the cord again. The engine caught. A deafening roar filled the workshop. Blue exhaust smoke poured out of the muffler. The gray mass violently recoiled. I grabbed a plastic zip tie off the shelf, wrapped it over the throttle trigger, and pulled it tight. The engine screamed. The chain spun into a blur of silver metal. The sound was agonizing in the closed room. I picked up the screaming saw by the top handle. The vibration felt like it was going to tear my arm off. I rushed it to the window. With one massive heave, I threw the running chainsaw straight through the broken window, out into the rainy yard. It hit the mud with a heavy thud, the engine still screaming, chewing violently into the dirt. The entity didn't hesitate. The gray mass poured backward out of the window, drawn instantly to the noise. I didn't stay by the window. I threw myself backward, diving behind the heavy workbench for cover. Outside, the chainsaw continued to roar. The pitch of the engine shrieked, a high-pitched whine of metal binding against immense pressure. Then, a blast rang out. The workshop rattled. The sheer force of the detonation neutralized it instantly. The silence vanished. The pressure in my sinuses released so suddenly I stumbled backward, gasping for air. The steady drumming of the rain hitting the tin roof returned. I collapsed onto the floor, pulling in deep breaths of the damp air. The ringing in my ears was slowly fading. The main house was safe. From the top shelf, buried under the broken glass, the shortwave radio crackled.
The anomaly has collapsed. The entity is gone.
I slowly stood up and stared at the radio.
The bait protocol was a success. We will monitor the area. Miller, out.
The radio gave one final click of static and went permanently silent. I stood up and looked out the broken window. The yard was pitch black, the mud torn up where the chainsaw had died. There was no trace of the frost. The anomaly was gone. I sprinted across the yard to the main house and threw open the door. Lauren was sitting at the kitchen table, holding Emma. The gunshot and the screaming engine had terrified them. I didn't say a word. I just walked over, pulled them both close, and held on to them for a long time. I told Lauren it was over, but looking out the kitchen window at the tree line, I knew I was lying. 10 years ago, I walked away from the DNR because I saw what they did at Fire Tower 7. I knew they used people to manage the anomalies, but I thought I was done with them. I thought my family was off limits. Last night, they brought it right to my front door. They didn't just use me as bait. They used Lauren and Emma as leverage. If the DNR thinks they can treat my home like a testing ground, they picked the wrong guy to corner. If you made it all the way to the end, drop bait protocol in the comments so I know you survived the broadcast. And tell me, what would you do if a voice on the radio told you an anomaly was right outside your door? Do you follow their instructions and make as much noise as possible? Or do you stay quiet and hope they're lying? If you want more raw tapes and field logs from Lantern Bend and the deep woods, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next frequency. Stay safe out there and keep the noise up. I'll see you next time.